Welcome to the Truck Crash Litigators Podcast, hosted by the Trucking Injury Law Group and part of the Lawyer Minds ecosystem. The Truck Crash Litigators Podcast is dedicated to discussing the latest legal trends in the trucking industry. We'll discuss everything from new case laws and regulations to breaking down specific cases. Our goal is to not only share our knowledge and insights with other trial lawyers, but also to inform and educate the general public. Here are your hosts, Kevin Coluccio, Lincoln Seiler, and Matthew Sharp.
Hello, everybody. This is the second podcast, the Truck Crash Litigation Podcast by the Trucking Injury Law Group. Kevin Coluccio here with the primary office in Seattle, Washington. Matt Sharp with his primary office in Reno, Nevada, and Lincoln Seiler with his office primarily in Seattle, Washington. We're proud to be working together, seeking justice and taking care of those folks and their families that have been involved in truck accidents. We wanted to put together this podcast to talk about safety regulations and where they come from, and also our network of experts that is important for handling these cases. So I'll share that the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations are adopted through the administration for interstate commerce, meaning when commercial trucks cross from one state into another. And I'll just say there are also other ways that you can have those federal rules apply. And this is what we refer to in our industry as the Bible of regulations, and it's very comprehensive. I am not going to suggest, nor will Matt or Lincoln, that the every single page of this applies. There's all sorts of I don't want to say business, but sort of corporate aspects to the regulations. But these are the regulations that truck accident lawyers need to know. I'll share that in addition to these federal regulations applying to interstate commerce, every state across the union has adopted through their own codification many, if not most, of the important safety regulations that apply in the federal mandate. It's critical that lawyers that are handling these cases know these regulations. We get into arguments about whether or not they're actual legal duties, and there are ways that we dealt with that. But you've got to know these regulations if you're handling these types of cases. And we're proud to say that we each have a great wealth of knowledge with respect to the regulations and how they apply. Lincoln or Matt, you want to add something briefly about the regulations? And we don't need to belabor that they apply, but they're important.
Well, I mean, it goes back to the issue that commercial truck drivers are held to a higher standard than your typical passenger car driver. They're professionals, and they're required to be professionals and adhere to those higher standards because the vehicle they're operating is so much more dangerous than a passenger vehicle when it's involved in a collision. So, we've all got these handbooks laying around, and they basically break down into, various categories, and there are some key categories that apply when you get into trucking litigation. But, there's preservation of records requirements, there are special training requirements, there are controlled substances requirements, licensing standards and qualifications, safety and fitness, hours of service, hazardous materials. You don't see that often, but those kick in as well. And then there are all kinds of obligations on the employers or the operator, the trucking companies, to maintain records and to ensure that their drivers are qualified. And all those things come into play depending on the type of accident or collision or case that you've got. They can be very helpful.
Matt, anything you want to add?
I mean, I think that just to kind of highlight it, literally like from beginning to end, that these regulations create the rules that a reasonable motor carrier's got to follow, from inspection of the vehicle to loading the cargo to how long your driver can be driving during a particular day. I mean, it's a very from point A to point B, essentially.
Well, and I'll add, inspections is really important. Hours of service, which is commonly HOS, is critical because they don't want drivers driving and then being sleepy, so to speak. That's a very critical regulation. And one that's unique that people don't know a lot about is, what does a driver do if his equipment stalls, and we refer commonly to a semi-truck and trailer as equipment, stalls or breaks down. And there are very specific regulations for where they put out the triangles. And people might say, well, geez, that's a little chippy, or that's a little over the top, but it really isn't, because these vehicles and their trailers can do an enormous amount of damage if they're in any way, shape, or form not properly guarded from other people coming upon them. And it's those little things that I personally think, and I think Matt and Lincoln would agree, separates us from others that handle truck accidents. And this is stuff, obviously, you can learn, and we help other lawyers all the time, but it's knowing these federal regulations and then knowing the individual state applications that's critical. The other aspect, and there is, as Lincoln said, the requirements for commercial drivers to apply and obtain their licenses, which requires a medical examination. And in the old days, they didn't have testing, so there are a lot of truck drivers out there that are so-called grandfathered in. But we also spent a lot of time on the commercial driver's license. This is the exam, so that we know what a driver is required to know. Use a cell phone, distraction, operating in hazardous conditions. And then we're not talking about heavy snow and ice, we're talking about rain, wind, and sometimes blinding conditions. Matt and Lincoln, I don't know if you have handled any cases where there have been dust storms or smoke covered highways, but those are important things to consider and are part of the commercial driver license exam and knowledge. So it's having that knowledge that is critical for taking care of people. And I don't know if either of you want to add anything more about the regulations or the commonly called the CDL, commercial driver's license, but those are just important things that we spend a lot of time reviewing and handling internally so that we can go out and help people.
I mean, you gotta apply the rules to the specific facts of the case. Like one thing I was thinking of on these medical exams, do they have to be like a legit exam? I was just thinking like that there used to be a chiropractor out on I-80 not far from Reno. He used to advertise for 30. Say, I'll do your medical exam in 30 minutes or something like that. I don't think that's what the rules envision, but
well, that's changed, thank goodness. And the way it's changed is that there is now a certified list or list of qualified medical examiners. But you're right. You were having chiropractors trying to supplement their chiropractic, and we're not here to beat down anybody, but they were supplementing their practice by doing 30-minute exams and approvals, which doesn't keep our community safe, which is one of our goals. The other thing I'll add is that all three of us spent a great deal of time getting stuff from J.J. Keller. And J.J. Keller is a resource used by motor carriers to train and direct their commercial drivers. So I know, Lincoln, you held up your book just a minute ago. I think that's a J.J. Keller book. We, in our resources, my library is behind me. Lincoln's is partially behind him and up to his left or right. And Matt has his library in his office. There we go. Okay. Yeah, well, here we go. We got somebody that's a little bit more resourceful. I don't want to, I don't want to attack myself too much, but it took several times for me with my lack of technology to figure out how to record these podcasts. So we're glad we're in front of you now, and we're rip-roaring ready to go.
I think there's that one of the things that I think is analogous. I mean, the profession of truck driving is absolutely critical to both our safety and our economy. I mean, it's, in my mind, it's akin to like a pilot, and you would expect pilots to have specific rules that they follow, and trucking's the same way. There's specific rules from beginning to end, and things that they need to do to make sure it's safe. If they don't do it, like, driving too long. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Kevin, where, with the limitations on the amount of driving. But if you're driving too long, you're going to be distracted, and distracted driving, can kill people.
Hours of service are critical, because people shouldn't be driving for 20 hours at a time. Go ahead, Lincoln.
I was just going to say your comparison between a pilot and a truck driver is apt, because the consequences for both of a mistake can be catastrophic. I mean, not like making a mistake driving a car can't be catastrophic, but the mistake of driving an 80,000-pound truck or an airplane is far more potentially catastrophic than a passenger vehicle. And so it goes back to they're held to a higher and a professional standard because the consequences of a mistake are so much more grave.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing that I would add that a lot of people aren't aware of is what's called the Preventability Accident Manual. And I don't know if it's coming reverse to you. I apologize if that's the case, but this is a manual that is such a great tool. It just has a countless number of examples of how an accident could have been prevented through proper action and skill of a driver. And it really does take training, experience, and skill to operate these huge pieces of equipment on our public highways. We've all handled, the three of us, a variety of cases. I've handled a case in which a truck driver failed to understand the height of a bridge and literally knocked the bridge into a river, causing two people to literally have their car, like in the movies, shoot into the river. I've handled a case where the truck driver didn't have the experience and knowledge that was required and dictated in this manual, and he took a corner in a not on the highway but in a city, and his rear end wheels of his trailer off-tracked onto the sidewalk and crushed the young woman. There's just so many different examples of what's required for a driver to be allowed to get behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound piece of equipment. And I feel fortunate that I've got my two colleagues here where we can bounce different ideas off of each other. And, hey, I was thinking about this. Well, have you thought about that? It's something that is unique among groups of lawyers, given the experience that we have. But we wanted to just share with you some of the tools, the regulations. I will tell you there is one aspect of these regulations that doesn't make the three of us and probably every trucking lawyer across the country happy, and that is that the minimum limits, insurance limits, are $750,000, $750,000, and that is frankly ridiculous and tragic. And that minimum was set 20, 30 years ago, and the industry has fought the demand that it be increased. So we appreciate you being here for podcast number 2 by the Trucking Injury Law Group, the Truck Crash Litigators Podcast 2. I'm really good in court. I get tongue-tied once in a while. But Matt or Lincoln, anything else you guys want to add to this podcast number 2 before we call it a wrap?
Nope. Thank you again for listening.
Not on my end, Kevin.
All right. Well, reach out anytime, folks, if we can be of any help. We're all three around and available and are gladly willing to help out.
That concludes another episode of the Truck Crash Litigators Podcast, hosted by the Trucking Injury Law Group and part of the Lawyer Minds ecosystem. Thank you for listening, and we truly hope it was worth your time. Please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. Explore the other content that Lawyer Minds has to offer and engage with us on social media. Your feedback and ideas are always welcomed. See you next time.